I am very excited to welcome back to the show once again congressional candidate in Washington's 5th District, Chris Armitage. Welcome back to the Damage Report.
Hey, thanks for having me, John. I appreciate it. It's always a treat, although I'm sorry we couldn't coordinate outfits this time.
I know I could throw a jacket on. I never know with this. I mean, I got board games in the background. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to wear. A tie feels out of place considering the apocalypse we're in the middle of. But you look quite great. So you should be very happy. So I know that you've been taking the pandemic we're in very seriously on the campaign trail. You've made it a response to it a big part of what you're doing. You have a new plan. Could you give us some details on that?
Absolutely. Emergency preparedness and response is my background. I've worked within incident command systems before. And so I see that my opponent, they wanted to make sure that they put out thoughts and prayers to the people who are the victims of their corruption and ineptitude. Well, in addition to thoughts and prayers, our campaign has decided to offer an extremely detailed and in-depth disaster response plan related to the pandemic that we're going through. It involves nationalizing the medical supply chain to have grants out there as well for 3D printing ventilators and a lot of different supplies, mandating that companies provide or create masks and other crucial medical equipment and fluids to the exact levels that we expect to need. Our administration and the GOP and the establishment, they have gotten used for so long to not listening to scientists, to listening to their lobbyists, to listening to their donors. And so this plan is a response to that, to say, no, this is what a real response looks like. You go to the experts and they tell you this is what we need. And then you go to the medical supply chain, you go to the supply chain for different logistics organizations, you get the military involved because they already do things on this large scale. You have them help coordinate that chain, and then you get it to the public because that's what you do in a disaster. You don't worry about giving tax breaks to the 1%.
You know, it's interesting because they finally passed that bill, and it does a lot that we're probably going to be dealing with the fallout for literally years. But in terms of helping hospitals get the personal protective equipment or the equipment such as ventilators that they need, there's very little even discussion, let alone funds going to that. Donald Trump has so far, he has sort of backed off from any sort of personal involvement in either obligating companies to produce it or helping to coordinate the logistics of getting it to everyone. Do you think that that's one of the biggest, sort of gaps, one of the biggest holes in the response so far is a lack of a proper prioritization of getting that equipment to the hospitals that need it?
Not even lack of prioritization. It's just not even on the radar for them. He was just bragging on Twitter about his ratings.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, in 2012, Chris Christie was out, and I'm going to give credit where it's due. Chris Christie was out stumping with Romney. And then Hurricane Sandy hit, and President Obama didn't prioritize New York over New Jersey. He went out and hand in hand with Chris Christie, he helped the people of New Jersey. And when that was all done, Chris Christie had to begrudgingly thank President Obama. And that is what leadership looks like in a time of crisis, in a time of disaster. And we don't see that happening because it's a simple process. It's a straightforward process. And we managed to do it for World War II. Mm-hmm. We managed to do it in a way where we said, this is the problem, this is what we need to get done. And we nationalized supply chains to get what we needed to get done.
I'm really glad that you're making that comparison because, I've read about, our output during World War II, a number of, planes and tanks on a daily basis. And now with decades more of technological advancement, more productive workforce, it's like, can we make respirators and masks? I'm not sure. Maybe we'll be able to get them to the people that need them. So I would love to hear more about your plan. I'm also curious, with the recovery bill that was passed, if you had been in this position already, if you were there to debate this on the floor, what are some of the changes you would have liked to see made to that bill?
Absolutely. Well, I'm a big believer that especially during this time of crisis, we need to make sure that everybody's taking care of. Means testing is not something that we should be worried about right now. I had a Republican who owns one of the buildings out here I was speaking to, and we get along very well. And he said, "Oh, are you okay with Donald Trump getting a check for $2,000 in this recovery plan?" And I said, "Yeah, I don't give a damn if he gets that check as long as a working family doesn't have to wait 3 more weeks to get some food for their children." I'm
Yeah.
okay with that. And so prioritizing a universal basic income, particularly during this crisis. And again, in our I know after this you'll flash where you can find our disaster response plan, which also includes some foreign policy that'll help get us through this. Uh, Making sure that we get people what they need. It is not something that needs to get complicated. It's not something that needs to be difficult. We have trillions of dollars that we're continuing to dump at these folks. No more tax cuts, ban on stock buybacks, making sure we're giving families at least $2,000 a month. And $2,000 in New York City is something that'll make people sweat, when in Alabama, that is a windfall.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that on every single level, up and down, that's where federal leadership is crucial. I believe in states' rights to the highest degree possible. But when you have a pandemic that doesn't give a damn about where your borders exist, in a bill such as this, it's the time for the federal government to actually show leadership and to actually show dedication. Instead, we have people like my opponent who are hiding. They're disappearing, and they only crawl out to go vote on a tax cut for the billionaires and throwing crumbs to the working class.
Yeah, and I know I'm sure you saw the unemployment numbers within the last week, and we're just days away from the first, rent payment and set of bills that people are going to have to pay under this. Are you worried about what the impact of that could be? The millions that have lost their jobs, and suddenly they're going to have to be shelling out thousands of dollars that many of them might not have?
Yeah, well, I'm a supporter of the national rent strike and a general strike, because the fact is, if it comes down to you paying your rent or feeding your children or feeding yourself, feed yourself. Enough of us do that, maybe the government will start to listen. That's something my mother told me years ago. She said, vote with your dollar, Christopher. And that's true. Where we decide to spend our money in this crisis is what's going to get the corporations, the true puppet masters for our political system, to actually pay attention. And so I fully encourage people, do what you need to survive, because your federal government has abandoned you.
Yeah. I'm curious. So I've been following from the very beginning this response. It seems stumbling and begrudging and anti-science from the very beginning, and yet apparently 60% of the American public thinks that Trump is doing an acceptable job. And the Democratic Party, their opposition to some parts of that recovery bill was barely there. They seem to be taking a very hands-off approach to Donald Trump in his response. Do you feel that the lack of vocal opposition to what he's doing is sort of slowing down that awakening process that you were just talking about?
It's difficult to say, but I think that there is a lot of fear against standing up or pushing back. And our race right here in Washington's 5th is really a good indicator of that larger litmus test. Now, it's me, the sole Democratic challenger, against a Trump Republican. And I'm not here to represent the Democratic Party, even though I have a D next to my name. I'm here to represent Medicare for all, getting money out of politics, the things that have led us into this mire that we're in now, into this dangerous situation that we're in now. And so while it's difficult to get a feel for the national spectrum, I know Trump's approval rating's the highest it's ever been. In our district, people are feeling that pain.
Yeah.
Particularly, we had 11% unemployment before this happened.
Yeah.
In this district.
Wow. And so I looked it up, and according to your website, your primary is 127 days away. Those 127 days are probably going to be pretty different than you would have expected a few months ago. Talk to me about campaigning under an inability to really go face-to-face with people, knock on doors, that sort of general canvassing. How are you adapting to this new environment?
Well, it's definitely been an entire shift for the whole campaign. We're talking about changing the direction of over 100 volunteers and a full staff. Now, in the last 2 weeks, our fundraising saw an uptick. We've raised about $20,000 in the last 2 weeks. Congressman Ted Lieu's endorsement helped with that, and I really appreciate that when a sitting U.S. congressman spoke to this working class guy who is 27 and just was a staff sergeant in the Air Force. Ted was an officer, and says that he wants to serve in Congress with me. That meant a lot, and so that's fortunately helped us keep our momentum going. Because the message I get to people is we can't let the ineptitude and corruption of our incumbents, the thing that caused this mess, be what gets them reelected. Yeah. We need to stop planning for just the next election cycle and start planning for 50 years in the future.
Yeah.
And so we're shifting almost entirely to text banking and phone banking. Now, fortunately, a lot of people are very angry right now. I know the president's approval rating might be higher, but we have a lot of people who are furious about what's going on. Thankfully, Washington State is doing a good job of flattening the curve. But while our governor is doing everything he can, he's being denied resources by the federal government. Yeah. Even Republicans in this state are going to be upset about that. And so as much as we can, we're shifting that focus and we're getting people unified. And mutual aid is also something that we're prioritizing. We have a lot of incredible mutual aid organizations out here, some state house representatives and city council members like Marcus Riccelli and Kate Burke. They're doing a great job of organizing mutual aid efforts so that we can get people food, especially service workers, healthcare workers, the elderly, particularly vulnerable populations. We're getting them fed and we're taking care of each other.
And that's what's important. And certainly is going to differentiate yourself from the current incumbent, who appears to be incredibly hidden in the shadows during all of this. Chris, where can people find out more about your overall platform and also what you want to do in response to this pandemic?
Sure. So you can go to armitageforcongress.com, ARMITAGEFOR Congress.com. I'd also recommend checking out our Twitter. That's where we posted about our response plan. We have our introduction video. This is the sole race that I know of in this country from our research, or at least one of the few, where you have someone fighting for Medicare for all, K through 16, universal child care, ending the military industrial complex, versus a Trump Republican in a district that was on the red to blue list in 2018. Yeah. So at Real Army is what we are on Twitter too. Reach out. Our DMs are open. I'll respond. So appreciate it. Take care.
Awesome. As always, thank you so much for joining us.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.